Here's a story you might not know too much about, but we think you should. I know a lot of you have been concerned about concentration of power in the media. Mega corporations and multinational conglomerates control almost everything you watch and read. Not here at Newsmax. We're independent, of course, but that's not the case for most of the media out there. We know you've also heard a lot about Facebook and Twitter prioritizing your news feeds. They're telling you what's important, not you. It's a disturbing trend, and it's happening at local newspapers and televisions, too. It's one of the biggest stories in the media business right now. We're talking about the proposed merger between Sinclair Broadcasting and Tribune. According to a recent article in Politico by former House Majority Leader Tom DeLay, if antitrust regulators in the Trump administration allow the merger to move forward, it would create the largest broadcasting company in history. A lot of Republicans like the idea of the merger. History has taught us that normally the best course of action is to avoid burdensome government regulations. Also, a lot of conservatives are excited about the prospect of a national broadcast giant with a distinct right-leaning perspective. But it could backfire on conservatives, and the result could actually be. And as a veteran of the local news industry for a long time, Tom, I know you know a lot about this story. I care a lot about this story. Explain to us how this mega merger between Tribune and Sinclair could actually lead to a very, very bad thing for conservatives.
Well, John, first of all, normally I'd be supporting the free market and competition. But the problem here is the competition is limited because the spectrum is limited. So it requires some sort of regulation in order to make sure that the best are in the industry and the best are competing with each other. The problem is if you're in this scope or in this world that is limited and you start getting these mega conglomerates where you only have two or three, then the competition is very limited. And most importantly, particularly in the media, and Sinclair Tribune merger is a perfect example of that. This merger will create a conglomerate that has over 230 TV stations, a whole lot of other outlets, and it will cover 72% of the households in America. That is a huge amount of power to control.
And the flip side of this, Tom, is that if we allow Sinclair to move forward with this, that means that other big giant media corporations that might not have the same kind of perspective as Sinclair, they could potentially do the same thing, which means like Comcast, right, which owns MSNBC and NBC and a lot of our cable boxes, right? They could also control local media on top of their networks. And that would give a company like Comcast a tremendous amount of power. And also there's another merger out there that we should all be concerned about, and that's between AT&T and Time Warner. That could open the door for that merger as well.
Exactly. And I'm a little baffled by those by the Department of Justice who seems to be, because they filed a lawsuit, seems to be against the merger of AT&T and Time Warner. But it looks like they're leaning for the merger of Sinclair and Tribune Media. If they approve Sinclair Media, then they're going to be very embarrassed and probably have to approve of AT&T and Time Warner too. And as you say, John, I'm looking at the politics of this. When we took over the majority for the first time in 60 years in 1994, we had to fight the Northeast conglomerate media. And the only way we were able to do that is to go to radio talk show hosts like Limbaugh. We had a fax machine in his office and it ran 24 hours a day. We were feeding that animal a lot of information. And we had our members going to their local TV stations so that we didn't have to rely on NBC, ABC, and CBS for the political information. If in today's market, it makes it even more difficult to do so. Even though some people say social media is helping getting a message out. Certainly, Trump has proven that. But the point
Tom,
is,
just for some perspective, on where things could potentially go from where they used to be. You talk about in the Politico article, when President Reagan was in office, the FCC under President Reagan, they actually raised the ownership caps. At that time, you were only allowed to own 7 television stations in various markets around the country. They raised that, the Reagan administration did, to 12. But now we're talking about a company like Sinclair owning more than 125 stations in more than 115 different television markets around the country. So that's quite a jump from what Reagan thought was appropriate and his FCC thought appropriate to what we have today. And you talked about this. The concentration of these messages in the hands of so few. You talked about the ability for House members to go to their local television stations. Why should a House member who represents a district in the state of Georgia have to get permission from a television network in New York or Philadelphia to speak to his constituents? It just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense, and it's very, very dangerous. Look, I mean, just take the memo fiasco that's going on right now. Every other than Fox News and Newsmax, every other media outlet is poo-pooing the Republican memo. That is completely changing the narrative of what actually is happening. It is extremely dangerous because the FBI has abused its power, and the media is covering it up right now. And it would get worse if it's more consolidated, and you only have most of the media outlets in 2, 3, 4, 5 outlets.